We are joined again by our international correspondent, Alex Newman. Alex, good to have you back again.
Thanks for having me, Duke. Great to be with you.
We have another story here that I think is indicative of the very perilous times we live in, and this one has to do with charter schools. This was going to be the one-time solution, wasn't it, to our problems? And it was kind of always from the beginning, the whole idea of charter schools was kind of naive. We would allow money to be diverted away from public schools, but that money's already been paid in taxes. The states have that money, and then we divert it away from the state and the feds, and then you create a separate school that might be a classical school, a real school, not what we get in the public sphere. And it didn't really seem to dawn on the creators of this that as long as the states and the feds are paying for it, inevitably they were going to co-opt it like they co-opted everything else. Nevertheless, we have a new twist to the charter school program. We have an authoritarian billionaire, a dictator basically, who's willing to spend $750 million to funnel into charter schools. And my obvious first question is, Alex, what's he going to get for his money?
It's a very good question, Duke. And I think there's several things going on here. One, you've got a lot of billionaires in this space. You've got Mark Zuckerberg, you've got Bill Gates, you've got now Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And a lot of them are profiteering big time, right? Bill Gates in the most obvious way, but Michael Bloomberg as well. I'm sure there is something in it for him. But there's also the ideological implications. See, Michael Bloomberg is a totalitarian in an extreme sense. I've run into this guy multiple times at UN conferences and stuff. He's always surrounded by armed bodyguards. Meanwhile, he is fanatically trying to disarm the American people. He goes to these UN climate conferences and he demands all sorts of controls on the economy, basically a demolishing of the middle class, demolishing of the independent business owner, of the farmer and rancher. Says we can't, drive cars anymore. Meanwhile, he flies in on a private jet, then he flies home to his mansion, gets in his helicopter, flies out to the coast, gets in his yacht. I mean, this guy is an authoritarian hypocrite and a monster. And here he is pouring money into charter schools. You would be naive to the max to think that this guy just wants your children to have a better education. This is a guy who claims that the mass murdering dictatorship in China is not a dictatorship. So what do these billionaires all have to gain from pushing this charter school? I think there's several things. One is profiteering. And I don't know exactly the mechanics of how Bloomberg plans to make money on this, but I guarantee you he does. Two, you have families now all across this country, millions of families who are fleeing the government's collapsing institutions, these so-called public schools. And for good reason. The kids are getting dumber, they're being radicalized, they're being sexualized, they're being weaponized against their families, against their churches. So people are fleeing. Well, I think this charter school effort is really an effort to bring them back into the government system. Charter schools are government schools. Everybody needs to understand that clearly. They still teach Common Core. They still ban the Bible. They still ban prayer. Charter schools are government schools in every sense of the term. They just have a little bit more flexibility in like hiring and things like that. But they teach the same garbage. Generally, they teach it in the same way. So it is a plan, I think, to bilk taxpayers and also to get more people trapped in the government system. And I'll say one more thing before I toss it back to you, Duke. I know I'm rambling, but Bloomberg has been funneling billions into all kinds of subversive causes, especially gun control. One of the big things he's been funding is politicians who will support his agenda. So in Louisiana, he funded a whole bunch of advocates of charter schools. Well, I saw the aftermath of this. I was in Louisiana. I was speaking at a conference being held at one of the universities down there, Loyola University, and I met a Lutheran pastor who was also speaking there. This Lutheran pastor had attached to his church a thriving Lutheran school with hundreds of kids. I don't remember the exact numbers. Well, when the government authorized these charter school monstrosities, one popped up very close to his Christian school. And what happened? Just enough parents said, oh, a free charter school. I think I'll pull my kids out of this Christian school where I'm paying, put them in the charter school. Well, long story short, the Christian school lost enough students that it closed, it shut down. And what happened? Hundreds more students now were put into the government system. So I think that's what's going on here, Duke.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. And so let me ask you before we break here, is this primarily the left realizing we can't get rid of charter schools, which we'd like to do, so we might as well spend a lot of money to co-opt them?
They already do own the charter schools. So, I think the teachers' unions don't like the charter schools because there's a little bit more so-called accountability, right? It's easier for a charter school to fire a teacher who's a criminal or a pedophile who's not doing their job. And so that's why the teachers' unions don't like it. But they're authoritarian in the sense that they want to brainwash your kids. They want to radicalize your kids. And so I think this is really a fight within the totalitarian, the authoritarian movement. Charter schools, as far as I'm concerned, are already co-opted. I think this is an effort to corral the families that are fleeing from the government school system back into the government school system by dangling a fraudulent carrot in front of them and saying, well, you don't like the public schools, but here, try a charter school and it's free. And we won't talk about the fact that they're still going to learn Common Core. They're still going to be brainwashed. They're still not going to read the Bible. So I think it's an effort to keep the families on the government school plantation while giving them what they think is genuine choice.
After the break, let's talk a little bit more about the perilous future of education outside the public schools. Joined now by our international correspondent again for the second part of our interview, Alex Newman. Thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Duke.
So let's talk about the last couple of stories we've done over the last period of time. Seem to suggest that that what we predicted was going to happen is happening sooner or later, and probably sooner. Now that they have nailed down the public schools, they have completely frozen out parents. They are doing whatever they want to do with regards to critical race theory and sexuality, and no one can stop them. Inside the public schools, no one is able to stop them. So the next step is, now that you've got that nailed down, let's try to make it much more difficult for moms and dads to find alternatives. The first part of this conversation discussed how Michael Bloomberg, liberal authoritarian, is now spending $750 million to co-opt charter schools, even more than they already are. He's a guy who wanted no part of the charter school movement, fought against it, but now that it's here, right, he's going to manipulate it. And we have another story, did another story recently where we talked about how this mandatory pre-K that may be passed shortly by the federal government is going to make it much harder for moms and dads to do any kind of Christian or religious-based preschooling. Those schools may close down, shutter their doors, because once this becomes a free entitlement, we'll see how much more difficult it is for parents to pay for it, the taxes that come along with it. So here we are in a perilous state. They've already made you have conferences going on across the country that are suggesting that homeschooling must be outlawed, it must be regulated. Perhaps maybe we shouldn't let moms teach their own kids unless they have 4 years of indoctrination in big state education programs. What's left to happen here? What do you see over the next few years beyond what we've talked about? What do you think might be coming down the road?
Well, we see the pieces being moved into place right now, Duke, and so it's very easy to see where they're going with this. They are planning a full-blown assault on genuine school choice, quite ironically, under the guise of promoting school choice. We see this in California right now, where they're working on a ballot initiative. And there are a lot of really well-meaning, unfortunately naive people who are getting sucked up into this, thinking, hey, we can deprive the public schools of money by having school choice, and then using that money to send into private schools and homeschools and so on. Well, I've seen this movie before. I lived in Scandinavia for most of the last decade, and we saw this exact process play out. And it was even the same terminology. Oh, the money should follow the child, not the public schools. Oh, that sounds great, right? And parents all jump on the bandwagon. So then they start opening up the flow of tax dollars to these private schools, to these Christian schools. And it's just like the cheese in the mousetrap, right? Same for the homeschoolers. Hey, free money, woohoo, right? And the mouse saying, ooh, yummy, free cheese. Not thinking about, why is there free cheese in this trap? So eats the cheese and boom, then the trap closes. And that's what's going to come next. Once they're able to open up the flow of tax money to private schools, Christian schools, homeschools, independent schools, plus you've got the charter system, then they will close the trap door, and all of those will come under the authority of the government. Moms and dads who are taking government money will be expected to take the government's tests and meet the accountability. Christian schools that are taking the government's money will have to start teaching the government curriculum. And I saw this happen in Sweden in, I think it was 2011. They passed a law saying, look, all these private schools now that are taking this government money, they must teach the government's curriculum, which incidentally requires that first graders understand that gender is a social construct and so on. So that's where they're headed. We see them laying the groundwork now for a legal assault on homeschooling. That lunatic totalitarian out of Harvard University, Elizabeth Bartholet, is running around the country preaching the good news of banning home education with her sidekick, James Dwyer from William and Mary. We've talked about them before on this show. So they are putting the pieces into place to crush genuine school choice. And as horrific as it sounds, they're doing it while flying the banner of school choice. They need to be opposed and they need to be exposed.
Is it possible that the opposite may happen, particularly with the preschool situation? A lot of alarmed moms and dads who do not want to turn their children over to school, to the public schools even younger, they may decide to start homeschooling their kids at even earlier ages, and more families actually support homeschool because, again, we've reached the point where there are really no other options but homeschooling. So is it possible that things may swing that way?
I think that is what's happening right now, Duke, and the totalitarians realize this. We've had massive growth in homeschooling. The totalitarians are looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, how are we going to bring these people all back under control? So they're working on that now, but we have two opposite forces here: families fleeing and totalitarians trying to corral the family. So it remains to be seen where this will go, but we know what they want.